Hi, everybody. I'm Jamie Kale Miller here in Berkeley, California, with Pandora Astrology, and with me is.
Hey guys, it's Julia Mijas, and I'm joining in from San Francisco.
Today, I want to talk with you about outer planets and astrology's human life cycle. Now, the outer planets you might know are Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, and Chiron. There are six of them, and they all have orbits of differing lengths. And what this means is that their orbits are always going on. They will return at certain regular times in your lifetime, and this generates a human life cycle. Now, that was a mouthful that I just said, and I'm going to peel that apart right now so that it makes more sense. So there's a thing in astrology called a synodic cycle. A synodic cycle is a planet's cycle in relationship to itself. So for example, I've got up on screen the chart of an individual born January 1st, 1980. And Saturn is the best example of this. So this individual was born, and you can see the middle chart is the native. The outer wheel is the transiting planets in the sky. This native has Saturn placed at 26 degrees of Virgo, 59 minutes in their sixth house. And so when they were born, and this chart is set for their actual birthday, so this is the day they were born. However, and I'm going to set this by years. You're going to watch Saturn travel all the way around the wheel and return. This is the reason for the famous Saturn return. Watch it return to where it was when this person was born. So watch it go. There's Saturn traveling around, and now it's opposing itself and getting ready to return. And let me set this by months. We'll see it happen. It's retrograde right now, and boom, there it is. This person's Saturn return happens in October of 2009. So Saturn has a cycle that's 29 years long. Pluto has a cycle that's massive, 245 years long. We don't even live through a whole Pluto cycle. The same is true of Neptune, another really long, massive cycle, 165 years. We don't live that long. So do returns matter for those planets? Well, not if you're a human individual, but there are things that matter, and those are quarter phases and possibly half phases. So that would be squares and oppositions. So let's go back to year zero, January 1st, 1980. And I'm going to show you this person aging. So Saturn, because it returns every 29 years, will square itself every 7. And then will oppose itself, square itself again, and return. So every 7 years it goes along a quadrant and forms an angle to itself. And that's the synodic cycle. It includes a return, a first quarter, an opposition, a third quarter, and another return. So it's like the moon that way, right? It's similar to the moon phases, but with a different planet. And each time that planet, in this case Saturn, transits itself, it puts you through a Saturn feeling time period, like a mini Saturn return. The Saturn return itself is characterized by feelings of heaviness, seriousness, obligation, duty, pressure to perform, and isn't age 30 exactly that? You feel like you're on the threshold of true adulthood. You may even feel that you're over the hill. And there's a seriousness about life that you've never quite felt before. That's the Saturn return. But we have a sort of a mini version of that feeling every 7 years when Saturn squares or opposes itself. So it happens at age 7 and 14, 21, 29, and then it starts over again and continues. And it does that throughout your whole life. That Saturn cycle is very regular, very understandable, And it forms the skeleton of the human life cycle. So built on that and in relation to that, there are other cycles that are always happening. Uranus, for example, has a cycle that is 3 times as large. And what that means is that while Saturn spends 7 years going through 3 signs, a single quadrant of its cycle, Uranus is only going through 1 sign. It spends 7 years in every sign. So this means that Uranus makes an angle to itself in its cycle every 21 years. So let's just look at age 21 for this person. So if they were born on January 1st, 1980, then 2005 would be 2001 would be about age 21. Now these things aren't always precise, but here you can see there's Uranus in Aquarius getting ready to square itself. And there it's doing it. So, and this is where it gets complicated. You're probably already thinking this is complicated, and you're right. But it's not like there's just one planet out there that's impacting us with its cycle. The reason that human beings are complicated is because we are made up of many planetary influences, quite a few of which conflict with each other and pull us in these massively different directions. And then this happens again in the changes that we go through. You could be going through a change involving one planet that says, you got to be a grown-up, you got to be mature, you got to keep it together. While at the same time, you're going through a change triggered by another planet that says, oh my God, my core wounding is up at the surface. Oh my God, I'm in so much pain. I'm in so much pain, but I got to keep it together. Oh, I'm in so much pain, but I got to keep it together. And that, my friends, is age 50, which is when the Chiron return happens while Saturn is making a square to itself. So there are in the human astrological life cycle certain ages which I call vice grips ages. If you remember what a vice grips is, you might know that it's a sort of a carpentry tool that you keep on your tool bench where you can pinch something really hard by screwing it together, in this pincher so that you could saw at it, perhaps. So the vice grips is really the very epitome of being stuck between a rock and a hard place. And there are certain ages where certain transits collide to make you feel just so under pressure. So the chief of these is around between 20 and 22, when Saturn is squaring itself, and you can see that happening. Here's Saturn coming into Gemini, moving into a square with itself in Virgo, while Uranus is squaring itself from Aquarius to Scorpio. So between the ages of 20 and 22, we have pressure from Saturn. And what do? We come of age, right? Age 21. In many cultures, that's an age when you become legal in certain ways. And Saturn is saying, oh, I'm leaving college and I have to go out into the world and I'm going to have to earn for myself and I'm going to have to figure out my housing and make my own money and get married and oh my God, and have to start at the bottom and work really hard. And that's Saturn's voice in one ear. And the other voice in the other ear is Uranus, which is saying, I want to take the world by storm. I have genius in me. I want to break all the rules. I want to catapult myself to the top. And those two are just shouting at you. And so it's no wonder that what do young people do when they turn 21 and they get their driver's license, making them legal to drink? Well, they go and get plastered, because who wouldn't? So then the other really big vice grips age, well, there are two others. The second really big vice grips age is midlife. Now, there's a reason why we call it the midlife crisis. That's because there is a cluster of transits that all happen between the ages of about 36 and 43 in this 7-year period that all happen boom, boom, boom. Some of them overlap. Some of them will maybe give you a little break in between. But the overall feeling is like, oh my God, I'm being beaten about the head and neck by these outer planet transits. At 36, and let's see, what is 36 for somebody born in 1980? That would be 2016, 80, 90, 10. Yeah, 2016, approximately. Saturn will be, again, entering into a square with itself, and there it is in Sagittarius, coming to square itself in Virgo, while that's the main one at 36. And then it's fairly quickly followed by Neptune moving into a square with itself. And here's Neptune coming into a square with itself. And that's around age 40, completely normal for the Neptune square. And then shortly after that, we have the Uranus opposition. And here you can see that beginning to happen around age 43. And also the Saturn opposition. And there that one is coming into be. And so really the ages between about 40 and 43 are the most crisisy of the midlife crisis. But there's another factor that I haven't been mentioning so much, and that's Pluto. And the thing about Pluto is all of the other planets have a regularity to them, and Pluto's transits drift. And isn't that just a bitch? Pluto, you know, of course, it would be Pluto, right? That doesn't have its first quarter square at the same age for all human beings. Instead, it drifts. So if you were born in the middle part of the 1960s, the first, like right around 1963 or 4 or 5, then you had your first quarter Pluto square younger than anybody else at around the age 34, 35, which is crazy to have to deal with a Pluto square. If you were born in the 1800s, you could have had it much, much later. This is because Pluto's orbit is very, very elliptical. So you would have had it probably in your 80s, your 70s or 80s. Now, Pluto is a really, really heavy feeling planet. It's about transformation. It's about death and rebirth. It's about the heaviest possible topics. And so when the Pluto square happens, it's a time for a really major transformation. And when that drifts into the zone where it lines up with the other midlife crisis transits, wow, it just makes the midlife crisis that much more crisisy. And all the generations alive today have pretty much been experiencing that condition. So, Julia, I want to ask you for some help here, because I've just been sort of setting up the audience to feel this dire sense of like, oh my God, midlife crisis. I so don't want that, but I'm going to experience it. And now's the moment when we need to let everybody know, how do you handle this stuff? And why is it not so bad? And why is it just part of being human? So, Julia, when somebody comes to you and you know, even if they don't, that they are having their Saturn return, that they're like, 28, 29, 30, and their Saturn return is either in full swing or they're really just kind of still reverberating with it. What are the sorts of things that you say to that person? How do you normalize that for them?
Sure. Well, Saturn returns. Saturn, if we look at it, it's a planet that represents old age, and it's a work planet. So a lot of what it represents in your chart is what you are here to kind of do with your life. So people, even though they're not that old, whenever their Saturn return happens, they start feeling old. They start feeling like, oh God, there can sometimes be this impending sense of like, there are limitations on me. There are heavier responsibilities on me. If I don't figure out what I'm doing with my life now, maybe I never will. That's at least for the first Saturn return, that's generally what comes up. And like since Saturn is part of that synodic cycle, and it will make several revolutions throughout your lifetime if you live to a very ripe old age, Saturn is always going to be testing itself every 7 years.
Yes.
So even if you don't get it all together at the Saturn return, you will have other opportunities,
Yes, that's
7
true.
years down the line when it squares itself and it opposes itself, to kind of, you'll kind of be going through mini versions of that to sort of get your, figure out exactly what it is that you want out of life and where your real master work is going to be.
Yes, so true. And think about the difference between how it feels to be 29 and on the verge of true adulthood, really, and how different that is from the second lifetime Saturn return, which happens around double that, or age 58, when you're really looking backward at a productive, phase of your life, and what's in front of you is more like, how can I wind it down and look towards retirement?
Sure.
So that's a Saturn return too, with all of those same feelings of fear and pressure, but with really, I think, a very different view to the future.
Yeah.
And then we have a third Saturn return, which happens around the age of 87, with its own unique and different feel.
I haven't counseled many of those people yet.
No, it's true. It's true. Yeah, people in that age are not that interested in astrology readings, and maybe it's because they feel like they don't have a lot of future left. But these are the sorts of things that you and I, Julia, talk about every day with clients in readings, especially the Prime of Life reading, which is designed to take that feeling of midlife crisis and turn it around into something more positive. So I want to take a moment to kind of drill down into some specific ages. So age 21, very much the vice grips. Uranus is saying, I want to take the world by storm. Saturn is saying, I've got to be a grown-up. Julia, do you have thoughts about, what you'd say to somebody who came to you at the age of 21 for a reading, or whose parent got a reading for their adult child at that age?
Well, yes, Uranus is about individualization. It's about how we are unique in the world, and that's why in the early 20 stages, people just start acting out in all these rebellious ways because they're trying to differentiate themselves from the crowd. And since it's an opposition, it can certainly pop up in their relationships with their parents, with their teachers, with their boyfriend and girlfriend. So yeah, my advice at the time would be I would look at where their Uranus was in their chart and try to understand exactly what would be sort of the gentlest way for them to individualize themselves and be authentic to themselves with causing the least amount of disruption to others.
Yeah. Oh, that's such good advice. So then, these cycles repeat around the age of 42 or so, and another factor is introduced, which is Neptune. The Neptune square happens between about the ages of 40 and 42, and then 43, 44, Uranus and Saturn start wrangling again. So can you tell me your thoughts, Julia? Like let's say you saw a client who was in the throes of their Neptune square. They're 41, Neptune is squaring their Neptune. What do you say to a client who's dealing with that?
Well, whenever someone's having a major Neptune transit, they're going to be susceptible to illusions.
Yeah.
And that's so generally it's usually a good advice not to make any major, especially not overly idealistic changes to the life. Like whether that's, I want to take all my money and invest it in this startup. I want to leave my spouse and run off with, Neptune can create all of these, rosy realities in front of us. So I think it's less a time for acting and more a time for contemplating. I think, it's better to just kind of explore the dream and then wait until the transit is over to start realizing, hey, does this dream hold up? now that the sort of like fog of Neptune has subsided somewhat, and if it does, then go for it. That was what the transit was all about for you. And usually it's a mix. Usually some dreams kind of hold up really well, and then others a year or two later are like, maybe not so much.
Yeah, it's true. That's so sensible. What great advice. Um, Another thought about Neptune is because Neptune rules the artists and the dreamers and the visionaries and the imaginative people of the world. If that is your bag, you might feel around the time of your Neptune square that you come of age, that you hit a maturation threshold to where your vision comes really clear, and that then carries you through the next 40 years, which is wonderful. So then there's the classic midlife crisis, which is Uranus and Saturn vice grips around ages 43 and 44. And classic, by classic, I mean the stereotype, middle-aged guy, is aware that he's balding, he's got a belly, he's finds himself dating a woman half his age who's probably having her Uranus Saturn vice grips. Buys, a red hot sports car or motorcycle and runs away from all of the burdens of his life. And that's just a stereotype, but it really explains or illustrates that feeling of entrapment and like, I've got to seek my lost youth, and is my time running out to express my genius? And that's what we tend to feel during that ages 43 and 44. The last one I want to talk about that I think is really a big deal is the one at 50 that I mentioned before. And during this one, and let me show it here on the chart, 8. So that would be in around 2030. And we'll see that Saturn is, well, let me organize this around Chiron. The Chiron return, yeah, you can see right there it is. Chiron is in Taurus, natal Chiron is in Taurus, and the Chiron return is happening. But also, quick on its heels and maybe overlapping with it, Saturn moves forward and comes into a square with itself. So this is the one where you feel all that pressure of Saturn to, again, get yourself together, be very collected, be mature, even stoical, soldier on. But at the same time, because Chiron is the wounded healer, your lifetime's core wound is coming to the surface. And you can understand your core wound best by looking at where is Chiron in your natal chart. What sign is it in? What house is it in? What planets are it connected to? Because that's going to be unique and specific to you, so that your Chiron return experience can also be unique and specific to you. So, but it is likely to bring up core wounds that feel really ouchy and that you may have been ignoring and deferring and stuffing for years just so that you could cope and get through midlife. And, who doesn't understand that? And then having Saturn, coinciding with it or happening near it can really, sort of make you think maybe I should just continue clamping down. And that can set you up for health issues as you continue to age. Now, because Chiron is the wounded healer, its return can signal the coming of age as a healer. So if you have Chiron really strongly placed as a self-identifier in your natal chart, this can be the time when you, on your healing journey through life, really come of age and blossom in a big way. And that it happens at 50 is basically part and parcel of having your life be dictated by a late blooming mechanism. So that particular vice grips is really challenging. And Julia, what are your thoughts? What do you like to tell people when they come to you around the time of the Chiron return?
Yeah, the Chiron return, I think, Chiron issues tend to be characterized also with some degree of feeling inferior among those, whatever issues Chiron is highlighting in your chart by house, by aspect. So, I mean, there's this kind of, at the age of 50, people people can kind of let go of that feeling of inferiority and woundedness a little bit. And in terms of all the people who do healing in as their life purpose, whether it's something as direct as a medical doctor or, a counselor, or maybe somebody doesn't have a job that necessarily seems like a healer, but they feel like there's some healing capacity in what they do, then I really think that is when their career begins to hit their stride. Like I always think to myself, I prefer going to doctors who've gone through their Chiron return. It's like they
so
have all
sensible.
that clinical healing experience, and they can really, really start coming into their own. So I do think that that's something to look forward to the people who either see themselves professionally or personally as healers.
Yes. I love all that stuff. So I want to put a capper on all of this by stating some really significant ages in the life cycle. And we haven't had the time to discuss all of these ages, but I am going to say them in case you, the viewer, are anywhere near one of these ages, because it could be a really good time to understand what you're going through by having an astrology reading about it. So if you have a child who is 7, 14, or 21, those are all really great inflection points for understanding where your child is at. If you have a child who is 18, that's another one. It's a nodal return, which we haven't had time to talk about today, but it has very much to do with life purpose, feeling purposeful in life and clearing past karmas. 21, obviously, for multiple reasons. And then in the mid-20s, there's another one that happens. Pluto conjuncts your natal Neptune. That can be a time of disillusionment. I call it destruction of dreams. Happens anywhere between about 24 and 28 to people who are alive today. And then moving on into the 30s, of course, we have the Saturn return at 29. And you can feel that as early as 28 and as late as 30. Then there are a couple of golden years in the beginning of the 30s when nothing is going on in the human life cycle. And then what follows is a Jupiter return around 35, 36, which is awesome. And you can feel on top of the world at that point, like, hey, I haven't had to jump any big hurdles since I was 30. And now I'm the best thing since sliced bread. And that is, I'm afraid, the open doorway to midlife, where things start to get really crisisy as you move into like 36, 37, and all the way through about 44. And that's really where the, pardon my French, shit hits the fan, with Neptune square, Uranus opposition, Saturn opposition, a Saturn square before that, and all of it at once, and then Pluto too. Moving on into, and then there's another sort of a golden period where only Jupiter shows up to the party. So after, like, when you're 45, you're kind of out of the woods. And then as you're approaching 50, when you're 49, that's when you get into the zone for the Chiron Saturn thing that we just talked about. But around 47, 48, there's another Jupiter return. They happen every 12 years. So yeah, the 40s can be awesome for that reason. The latter half of the 40s, between 45 and 48, can be just awesome. Moving along into the 50s, we have a progressed lunar return around 54. I forgot to mention the first progressed lunar return around 26, 27, which is when a young person is beginning to figure out, or having to figure out, what is home life meant to be for me? Should I, get married and have babies? Should I get an apartment of my own? Yeah, and then a return of that at 54, and then we move into the second Saturn return at 58, and then at 60, voila, another Jupiter return. Yay! That can feel awesome. And these cycles continue into the 60s and in the 70s, and there are, the interweaving of many cycles, but the hardest part is definitely midlife. That's where things get super crisisy, and they all coalesce at once. So that's the ages that you should watch out for, including some vice grips ages you should really watch out for, and a sort of a general view of how it works in astrology. And gosh, Julia, I think we're done. Do you think we're done?
I think we covered it.
Woohoo! So I hope you enjoyed this video and that you found it informative and useful. You can always find us at pandoraastrology.com or on our YouTube channel, Pandora Astrology, where we're always putting out the news of the month and horoscopes besides. And you can even book readings with us by finding us on our services page at pandoraastrology.com. And until next time, we'll see you around the cosmos. Bye.
Bye-bye.